Hi, Dana here, and today I'm going to do a short video about salt. So salt is one of those really basic things, and if you are looking at cooking videos or you're following any kind of chefs, they're always going to speak to the importance of properly seasoning your food. And maybe you even watched that short documentary series that was available on Netflix, Acid, Salt. What was the name of that show? Anyways, you know it's got the named against about the different ways of flavoring and seasoning food properly and the different tastes that we have in our mouth. And one of the most important tastes that we have is salt. So we often are going to be salting our food either during cooking or after, and we're often going to even be salting water that we're cooking our food in. And this is okay. We don't really need to be afraid of salt if we're eating a balanced diet. Sodium isn't necessarily going to be a problem for a lot of us. If you're not eating a lot of processed foods, that's where most salt is coming from. It's mostly hidden. The sodium is hidden in ways that you don't even recognize. So for example, if you go to McDonald's, it's not necessarily the salt that's obvious on the fries that's going to increase your sodium levels the most. It's the salt that's hidden in the apple pie, which you don't think of as being a salty food. So a lot of the sources of salt in our diet comes from things like bread that you wouldn't necessarily be thinking of. So when you're making food at home and you're salting your food, you might be wondering, what kind of salt is it that I should be using? Because we have kosher salt, we have fine salt. So kosher salt is generally a coarser salt, and fine salt, of course, is fine. Now they come in different levels of grind, and the finer the salt, the saltier the food will be. So a teaspoon of fine salt is not the same as a teaspoon of coarse salt. So if something asks for coarse salt in the recipe, you do really want to use coarse salt because it will change the recipe if you use fine salt, for example. Another thing that you might deal with is what kind of salt, in terms of, do we want to use sea salt, Himalayan salt, a fancy salt that's maybe smoked or has a paprika flavor, or some other kind of something added to it, like truffle salt can really elevate a dish. So using appropriate amount and type of salt, it can really impact your dish. Himalayan salt is also referred to as pink salt. And I have some here, and there's a great quote on the back of the bag. There's no life without salt. No cell and no organism can exist without it. And of course, we all know about Gandhi and the importance of salt, and his life work really using salt as a statement piece. So you can see that in here there are some salt chunks that are white, there are some salt chunks that are pink. The pink ones are really the ones that have more iron in them. This is oxidation. That's what is making these pink. It's not necessarily going to help you with your iron intake, so it's not really important that it be pink. You can use white Himalayan salt. You can use sea salt. The point is to use a salt that hasn't had all of the trace minerals processed out of it. You want a whole salt if you can get that. So there are Utah-based salts. There used to be a really big expanse of water there that dried up and left behind some really mineral-rich salts. You can use those. Redmond salt, Celtic salt, these are all great types of salt that you can use. If you're going to use pink salt, I do recommend that you get a refillable grinder, and then you buy these big chunks of pink salt for your grinder. Something like this is great, and then you can just refill it when you want to use it. Then you know that it's more likely to be really just pink Himalayan salt and not processed. If you buy something in the big spice jug from Costco like this that is the ground Himalayan salt, then we're not really sure if that's processed, if it's just pink salt that's been ground, or what it is. Usually Costco, they do vet the products fairly well, but we're going to find out about that. We're going to look into it and find out. Recently, the one that's in a container like this, that is just the pink ground Himalayan salt, has changed, and they've added potassium iodide to the salt. And so potassium in and of itself isn't a bad thing. Most of us need more potassium, and iodine is also not a bad thing. Most of us also need more potassium, and iodized salt is not bad, and that isn't why we generally avoid table salt. And I do recommend that you do avoid table salt, something like this, which you can use for cleaning or for crafts or whatever you like, but I wouldn't cook with this. This has been processed to a point where they've stripped out a lot of the original trace minerals. And then there are a lot of extra ingredients in here that we don't need, like calcium silicate, sodium thiosulfate, and potassium iodide. So the potassium iodide is the iodine that we're talking about. And iodized salt is probably a really good thing for most of our health. A lot of people are low in iodine now that they're not using table salt any longer. So the addition of potassium iodide to salt, don't shy away from it. If you find that your Himalayan ground salt now has potassium iodide, that could be a good thing for you. But we want to find out if they've actually processed that salt and taken out the rest of the trace minerals. If they have, then you're not getting a full spectrum salt anymore. So I hope that that's helpful. For those of you that are using a salt that doesn't have iodine in it, you do want to be making sure that you're getting enough iodine from your diet, from things like seaweeds and other good sources of iodine. So especially if you're a vegan, a seaweed would be one of the best sources of iodine for you. A lot of people don't eat a lot of seafood, but you can add kelp to the boiling water of your foods. It can be very helpful to add some kombu to beans if you're boiling beans, because that can also help to make them not affect your tummy in quite the same way. So it can be also benefit to get the additional minerals that are in that seaweed into your food. So I'll post some more details down below about salt, and I hope that you found this short video helpful. Thanks.